Hello and welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoors podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you join us again. And we're well into Series 6, which is really great. And we're having a real, Anna-Marie, great time enjoying moving through this series. And we're going to intend to stretch you and challenge you a little bit with the outdoor coaching practice as we go exploring today the power of technology to transform. And so we're heading over to London, and today we have as our guest today is Sam Isaacson. Welcome, Sam. And what we'd love always to do, Sam, is ask you to explain and just give us a little bit of a headline about yourself, who you are, what you do, and we'll then get into a bit more detail as we go through the podcast.
Okay, well, I think what I do more than anything else probably is talk about coaching with technology. I've written a couple of books on that subject. My background is in the world of technology risk consulting. I did that for a number of years before starting to run coaching practices, firstly within a big professional services firm, and then leading the consulting work for a digital coaching provider. And now I work as a coach and also as a mentor supervisor, but particularly thinking about the use of coaching and use of technology in coaching and what kind of impact that has.
Interesting. Technology, AI. There's just so much conversation within the coaching world and the world in general. So really going to be interested to dive into how you fit and your thoughts. And I'm sure our listeners are going to be really intrigued as to kind of coaching outdoors technology. It could bring up some, bit of emotion, a bit of controversy, and that's very much what we're hoping within this episode today. But no, great to see you outdoors, the park of the South Ealing behind you. Thank you for being outside and setting the backdrop for people who are watching. If you're listening in, we've got some beautiful trees, and we all seem to have a bit of sunshine where we are in the UK as well, which for the end of September is a bit of a winner, I have to say. So Sam, diving on in, this is a question that we start with all our guests, and we would love to know what your earliest memory of being outdoors is, just to set the scene. And what is it that you enjoy about being outdoors?
My earliest memory of being outdoors, it's very difficult. My childhood memories are all sort of bundled up into one, but I suppose it would probably be an early birthday party of mine. My birthday is in October, and so it's the autumn, the leaves are turning brown, and I remember in my garden, the leaves had collapsed everywhere, and we took them and made a big number of whatever the number birthday it was at that point. And that being the party game that we had. So I think I've always enjoyed being outdoors, even though I've lived in cities my whole life. I think being in parks and gardens is a special place. So
that's really lovely. That's fantastic. Thanks, Sam. We love hearing people's early experiences and those memories that sort of stick with you, and it's just fantastic to hear those leaves and that sort of cyclical nature of October, which is really great. So thanks for sharing that. I mean, if we are then take a line back from sort of those early years and start to move through your career, would you be able to sort of share, with the listeners, how did you get to where you are now, and almost some of the milestones, the key milestones from sort of those early years through to where you are now?
I suppose the sensible place to start is after having gone to university studying music, which is one of those degrees that you then think, I have no idea what I'm meant to do with this. I ended up entering the world of technology risk, and so worked in big global professional services firms. Did that for several years, entering the world of IT audit and particularly focusing in the area of technology change, digital transformation, innovation, that sort of world, and discovering really that a lot of the problems that come out of change in organizations trying to use technology comes down to the psychology that's connected with change rather than the technology itself. So, I'd come in and look at all of their documents, look at the technology, and they seems to be doing everything okay, but still there were issues, and the issues are with conversations and with the way that people were perceiving the change. And so what that led to, long story short, is me becoming a coach and starting to offer coaching services, firstly within the banner of sort of technology change audits, and then as a standalone service by itself, coach development. The particular milestones, I suppose, in that would have firstly been me picking up the role of becoming the chair of the Coaching Professional Apprenticeship Trailblazer group. So long, isn't it? Unbelievable. Which is a government group that developed the apprenticeship standard, which as it stands now, I believe is the biggest coaching qualification in England. Most people are on that program rather than any other. And that's because employers are motivated to use that route. They can get it funded by the apprenticeship levy. And so getting all the big professional bodies on board to agree this is a good quality standard, and organizations are, there's actually a motivation there for them to use it. I thought that's a really great way to introduce a baseline of quality into the coaching profession, which is a bit difficult in a world where can't even agree on what the word coach means. So that felt like an important sort of stick in the ground. And then building on my background, understanding technology, not particularly being a sort of hardcore technologist myself, I'm not a coder, but was interacting a lot in that world, and understanding the world of coaching, ended up writing a couple of books on coaching with technology. And that's sort of stumbled into that being now my area of specialism, So now I've founded an online community called the Coach Tech Collective, where once a month I summarize all of the news stories at the cutting edge of technology. And so I'm more aware than most of, who's implanting chips into people's brains to experiment with brain-computer interfaces and looking at immersive technologies and what that could mean for the world of coaching. And of course, you mentioned AI right at the beginning. That's flavor of the month. There's a lot that's going on in generative AI from all kinds of different directions. And I really do think the coaching industry is going to be impacted in some really interesting ways in the coming years, particularly by most cutting edge of technology.
And thank you for sharing your story. I love just sometimes people's career paths of school, university choices, and then actually where you actually go, and kind of music to risk to data to technology analytics. Is the creativity part of it to it. But I do think, particularly for individuals who are younger and maybe kind of, well, where am I going? What am I doing? There really is just so much possibility. And actually, you don't have to have that, the tendrils of the past holding on to you. What can you draw for them ultimately then to move forwards? And your description, stumbled across writing a couple of books, and writing a book in itself is a huge project, and particularly the subject that you were writing on as well is an amazing achievement. But we'd love to just hear a little bit more about the Coach Tech Collective and this kind of community that you'll pull together and meet on a regular basis. And just you've kind of mentioned a couple of chips and brains, AI, but I don't know, just maybe some kind of like as we grapple with this cutting edge technology, how are we weaving our way through this, and maybe just a couple of examples just to really illustrate that.
Well, for me, I really feel like coaching is a world that inherently doesn't feel like it needs technology in it. It's a conversation. And so just sitting, I'm on a bench in a park, just sitting on a bench in a park with somebody and having a good coaching conversation, there shouldn't be, at a philosophical level, there shouldn't be a difference in the quality between that and doing it in some high-tech way. It's about the human connection and the conversation that comes out of it. At the same time, technology is advancing rapidly, and there's a big appetite, particularly in organizations, to get as much benefit out of technology as possible. And when we're thinking about delivering coaching at scale, actually it's impossible to do that without technology. There aren't enough human coaches in the world to serve the world's population. So if we think at a principles level, we'd like everyone to get access to one, that's the only solution, is to use technology in some way to reach those people. So I feel like as coaches, there are three core reasons why I think we need to be aware of technology and really thinking through what it means for us and trying to respond to that. The first is that we need to maintain rapport with our coachees. And technology as a general rule, this is huge generalization, but it is typically true that younger people adopt technology and are much more comfortable with it than older people. And we aren't getting younger, but our coachees are relatively to us. And so if we're going to keep rapport with our coachees, which I think is a professional duty, we kind of need to be comfortable enough with technology that we can meet them where they are. That doesn't mean that we need to impose technology on our coachees, but we need to be ready to go there if that's where they want to go. So the first time that somebody sent a link to say, here's my Zoom meeting, I'll see you there for my coaching conversation, most coaches have had to go through a learning experience of feeling like, well, I used to think that coaching has to be in person, and now I sort of have to rethink that. And so I think doing that to ourselves first is just sensible for that reason. Secondly, I think that technology has the ability to increase the impact of what we're doing. Some of that makes us more efficient. Some of it can increase the effectiveness. And some of the ways that I like to use technology in my coaching increase the creativity in a coaching space. So I've talked about this quite a lot before. I use generative AI artwork generators in a coaching conversation live to ask a coachee to type in, their coaching issue, and then just see what image is created by the AI, and then just explore that as a nice little experiment. It really helps to sort of cut through the cognitive, rational way that we're often sort of forced to go in the way that we communicate. And then the third reason is that if we don't get involved in technology and at least aren't aware of it and so know sort of where to draw our own boundaries, I really think that there's a risk that the future of the coaching industry is going to be driven by people who are not coaches themselves. So I think if you look at a lot of industries, actually technology providers and big investors, they're the ones that sort of define what the future of the industry looks like. And I'd really love the coaching profession to be one that says, there are other, training is another, you've got another craft that sort of sits alongside it and is trying to achieve similar goals. But coaching in and of itself ought to sort of stand there and say, actually, this is what our profession stands for. So if we're going to introduce technology, it should be there to double down on that foundation rather than undermine it. And so I think if coaches can be aware and get involved through the professional bodies, through, running their own technology startups in this space, that feels like a good way to support the profession into the future as well.
Wow, that's fantastic, Sam. I love that. And just gosh, there's so much things sparking off in my head with all of that. It's but I really heard I on an individual level, I hear the word readiness. We should be, as you say, ready to in ourselves first, who's showing up and how are we going to show up around technology and being, you're right, many of our listeners right now will be saying, I remember that first Zoom I did in 2019, or, and why would we not approach that same little bit of intrepidation and fear around, I'm going to do a virtual reality, or I'm going to use ChatGPT, and I get your readiness. So there's something really landing with me there. And then that whole thing, the scale, and why would we not, take on the impact and that creativity. We're always looking as coaches for new tools to, shall we say, elicit new insight for our coachees. And there is some amazing opportunities here with this technology. And so I really love that. And we'll dive in a bit more to some of that. And I'm also connecting up. I can see your background of being a tech enabler, that psychology of why people adopt these things, and there's that connective. I can see your connection coming through and how that works so well. And the last point you made is, I guess, we've got to get involved in the party. Don't be done to. We need to be, get involved and, do that. So diving into, I'm really interested in getting into a bit more of this virtual reality and understanding a little bit more as coaching outdoor practitioners. We have many of our listeners across, as you may well know, different creative fields, team coaches outdoors, working, etc., in all sorts of different areas, supervision. I'd love for you just to give us a bit more background around virtual reality that can transport us to, I think we were just talking exotic or familiar, or wherever, quite frankly. Could you open that right up a bit for us, please, Sam, and explain what it is you think? Where are we? What's happening out there?
So when I was first being trained as a coach, then one of the little exercises that we did was experience doing some walking coaching. So, we're going to start at the training room and we're going to go out, we're in a nice sort of manor house, I think I was being trained in, walk around the grounds, coaching somebody and come back in. And it was more than just pleasant, there was something very interesting that happened as a result of us sharing this experience where, our surroundings were changing, and it was changing for me and the coachee simultaneously because we were together. With remote coaching, which is, the vast majority of coaching that's delivered nowadays, it's often delivered with me in my own room, same room that I do everything else in, you in your own room, same room that you do everything else in, and then we're just having a coaching conversation. It's not unhelpful, it's very good, but we're sort of missing that opportunity to share an experience together where the environment is changing around us and we have the ability to sort of step into that. There are some changes coming. I'm happy to dive in as much detail as you'd like here, but over the next 24 months, let's say, there are some headsets that are going to be introduced into the market, which consumers are going to pick up more readily than they have done in the past, which is going to make meeting using virtual reality much more commonplace. That's not necessarily going to be moving to some exotic location. It's probably going to look very much like, I'm sitting in my room and you're sitting in yours. But instead of having the laptop screen in front of us, the screen will be portrayed as as an illusion that's sort of appearing on our eyes, but isn't there in real life. But we're going to be doing that remotely. And over time, that will turn into the use of avatars. And of course, you can then add some occlusion to those headsets that would allow you to present that as if we're not meeting in our rooms, but we are meeting in the same location together. And that it is possible now. The technology's there. And listeners, if you're interested, you could get yourself a cardboard headset that your smartphone will slot into for less than the price of an expensive coffee. For £3, you can have delivered to you a piece of cardboard. And then you can use, there's a platform called VTime XR, which is free. And then you can conduct meetings there where you could meet. I have met people, where have I met people? On the beach, in a nice Japanese garden, in orbit, and in an office block, yes. I'd met somebody on an executive jet one time, but the movement of the clouds made them feel uneasy, and so we went somewhere else. But it's interesting how the location that you're then in, and you'll have experienced this coaching outdoors anyway, it plays into the conversation. So there's one particular coaching conversation I remember conducting where we had met in a redwood forest, and virtually, and the coachee described the situation. She was going through a team change, and she described herself thinking that there were monsters that were hidden behind trees that might jump out at any moment. And it was after it, we did a little debrief after, what was it like being coached in VR? And I pointed out, did you notice you used a metaphor of monsters behind trees? And we were obviously surrounded by trees. And it hadn't occurred to her at all, that wasn't a conscious connection. But it seemed to me to be a very relevant one. We were in that space, and that's just what you would expect her to say. So I think using virtual reality, and like I say, over the next couple of years, I really think that's going to be something that people will start to use a lot more readily than they have done in the past. Things will become a little bit more affordable, and Apple will have their own device, and consumer behavior is shifted by Apple significantly. And so I think people will start to be able to meet in those ways. And so those people where, for example, I'm sitting in West London here, I've got reasonable internet connection, so I can go and sit in a park and be on Zoom at the same time. A lot of people aren't able to leave, their home if they're in a more rural area. To be able to put on a headset and effectively go somewhere that's a lot more natural, I think could bring a lot of the same benefits that being outdoors does, just through a different lens.
That's really good. Yeah. And I guess it brings out as well, Sam, that word of well, inclusion and exclusion, in the sense that it has the power to include. And I think, you know, those are the things as coaches we've got to be cognizant of. If it and I guess, can some of this stuff have bias? I mean, in the sense that what's set up in the locations you could go to? I mean, again, I suppose, are those things we have to be aware of?
I mean, I think we should always be aware of bias, you know, regardless of the level of technology that we're using.
Sure.
And from the research that's been done, you know, bias just exists inherently in data sets. We can't change that, and it exists in us. So I think, you know, the way that we operate as coaches, it's important that we're being non-judgmental in the way that we're delivering our coaching. And so the way that we approach our own practice is to simply increase our awareness of our bias and try to do what we can to make sure that that isn't negatively impacting the way that we're delivering our coaching. You know, there's some bias that's helpful. If we're biased in a way that believes in the other person's ability to solve their own problem, that's a helpful bias.
Yeah.
And so when we're using the real use case for this, the most extreme one, is in the use of generative AI and the way that that, you know, creates images. I created the image for a presentation I was doing last week of a group of superheroes, and all the superheroes were white. And I used it as an illustration. It was accidental illustration. Oh, look, just notice, you know, there is bias in the data set. It's not intentional, and therefore we need to be intentional in building the right sort of bias into our data sets. And increasingly over the next couple of years, as coaching large language models emerge, I think that's going to be really important, so that they don't just lean on, you know, particularly a sort of North American West Coast, you know, data set because that's what's most available to them, or even just trawling the internet because there's a particular voice that's loudest on there. Yeah. So yes, it's a real issue. I think probably less so in virtual reality, but I think it's always something for us to be aware of.
And thank you for sharing your story, that redwood story as well. It's just really kind of really getting me thinking, because it's like this part of being outdoors. It's that visual piece. So being outdoors is a far more sensory experience than just the visual. So it's almost it's like a kind of outdoors, but a part outdoors, a pretend outdoors. It's yeah. And just kind of sitting with that, and it would just, I mean, there just seems to be so many kind of pros and cons, and just from your experience in having conversations with numbers of people around this, what are the ones that are regularly being cited?
Sure. So probably the piece of research that I keep on kind of going back to in my mind as far as VR is concerned is a piece that was done a few years ago. I can't remember exactly when, but they identified, effectively, it was giving people goosebumps. They identified that as being a physiological piece of evidence of somebody in a state of awe. And they did a relatively simple experiment where they put people in a couple of different environments using Google Earth. So they could be on the ground, and then they could be in a city and in a rural area, and then they could be in orbit, and they had a free ability to move themselves around. And it was simply being in the virtual reality environment was able to induce a state of awe in these people in the same way as you would do if you had gone and seen Mount Everest or something like that. So it's a quite extreme example, and VR was able to induce that. So I think certainly putting on a VR headset isn't exactly the same as going outside, but it's bringing other benefits as well. So, you know, there are certain elements of being outside that are different in that it's slightly unpredictable. So, I mean, I'm sitting in a park at the moment, and I don't know if you could hear it in the background, but a few minutes ago, a guy was walking along. This is what happens in London. You see a guy was walking along with just a massive speaker on his back, just playing a tune, quite a loud drum and bass tune. And I thought, he's going to walk right in front of me, isn't he? Classic, in the middle of recording a podcast, and no one's going to be able to hear what I'm saying. And he went in a different direction. I think, but that's quite interesting, isn't it? That just happens when you're outdoors. Anything can happen. You know, it's interesting. There's something that's curious. Whereas when you're in virtual reality, part of what's nice about it is that it's very controlled. So you have, even if there is something in there which is slightly unexpected, you know that you're safe. So the example, when I coached somebody, they had chosen to be coached in a boardroom. There was the sound in the background of the office phone ringing. And normally when the phone rings, that's a distraction. It interrupts your conversation if somebody needs to get the phone. And in that instance, everybody remained calm. Nobody thought, oh, I need to go and get the phone. It's just sort of creating the environment. Mm-hmm. So there are certain aspects of being in VR that are very pleasant. You don't get interrupted by your phone because you're completely in this sensory experience. You're in three-dimensional surround sound as well, and so particularly when you've gone to there's a particular Japanese garden that I like going to, and there's the sound of the waterfall and there's the sound of the wind chimes and that sort of thing, which really does immerse you in that environment. But of course, you don't get some of those intangibles. I call it magic. Real life is magic, and a lot of what technology does, it appears to be magic at first, and then after you've used it for a while, then it isn't quite as magic and can be quite frustrating because you get used to the ways that it doesn't work. Whereas the real world remains magic for a very long time. I'm pretty old now, and I really like being outdoors still. I like to climb a tree. Or I like to climb a hill and look at a piece of scenery. That's not the same in technology. So I think while it's tempting to, I think it's dangerous for us to kind of in a universal way write off technology, or equally, and I think salespeople are particularly keen on doing this, is to claim that technology fully recreates the real life experience, whether that's through VR or AI or any other kind of technology, when in reality, we're meeting on Zoom today. It's nice, it's helpful, but it's not the same as meeting somebody in person. It just isn't the same, even though at a functional level, you can sort of tick down the list and say, well, yeah, we could see each other, we could hear each other, we could do all of the same things, but still, it hasn't got that magic to it. So I don't know if that answers your question or just dodges it. It's not quite the same. That's different, I suppose.
No, I think it's a very comprehensive answer, Sam, and one I think many listeners may well, there are some of our listeners out here that will be listening into the three of us and saying, oh, gosh, I'm a bit concerned about where this conversation could take us. And I think what I'm hearing is your advocation as an enabler. You're saying, and please correct me, we're going to go out there and we're going to meet technology and we're going to look at the creative benefits of the tool. And there are many inclusive parts to this. And, I can see that you're beginning to get me to understand that. But what you're also then really nicely saying there at the end is there's no better magic than the real world. And, it's that combination, again, as coaches, how we're selecting approaches, frameworks, models, tools in the benefit or the service of, our coachees or clients or whatever anybody, they're called. And is that how, I'd just love you to conclude that. Is there anything but you're also saying it can be a sensory experience in a controlled way, but it's never going to be all six senses are stimulated. Well, unless you're going to tell me there's technology that can smell some spray of water is giving me, I don't know, am I missing something?
So the problem with technology is there's always something which is just a slight step ahead. So it's not going to be here for the next couple of years, I don't think.
Yeah.
But there are already human experiments underway with some technology companies where they are implanting chips into people's minds that can take information from it and then send information back. So at a most basic level, what you can do there is put text in or move a cursor around on a screen just by thinking. That's relatively straightforward to do with technology now. It's quite expensive, so it doesn't exist on people's laptops yet. But at some point in the future, it'll be quite common. That's just the way that you'll control your devices. Yeah. There are some early stage prototypes where there is smell and physical sensation that is replicated through computer devices. I've tried some, and I think they are rubbish. They're just absolute rubbish. They don't replicate the experience at all. But they are there, and everything's rubbish at first. So the first the first conversational tool that could be used in a coaching setting, which was entirely run by a machine, was a tool called Eliza, developed in the 1960s. And people have often sort of heard of this or seen it being demonstrated. The quality of it isn't great, but at the time, the people who were trying it out, it was, I'm going to get this story slightly wrong, but it's close enough. A psychotherapist had developed this tool, asked his PA to try it. She sat down and started to have this text conversation with the computer and asked the psychotherapist to leave the room because she wasn't comfortable with him seeing the conversation that she was having with this therapist, this machine therapist. So even how many years ago? That a long time ago. That was being able to run really deep conversations. And then over all of that period of time, it's just got better and better and better. And it's only really in the last 12 months that tools like ChatGPT have made that accessible enough that people use it and go, this is actually quite good. I will do something with it. And in the coaching space, obviously, that's got a huge potential impact. So yes, I suppose just in response to your question, I am advocating that coaches educate themselves about what's possible and what could happen to their practice, and then prepare ourselves so that when that change does happen, led by coachees, that we're ready to go with that change. And I think our temptation, particularly as we're getting older, as I say, that our temptation is to think, well, actually, I just like things the way that they are. And so if there's a new piece of technology, I'd just rather not use it. Thank you very much. And what that does is it obsoletes us, and it takes away the potential impact that it could have. So I'm not an evangelist for more technology, not at all. I'm an evangelist for us finding out about it and using it intelligently.
So it really sounds like a bit of a call to arms going on here within the coaching profession. So almost like, what would your advice be to us to get involved? There seems to be, there's maybe a bit of a fear, a bit of the unknown, and the rate of technology is changing so fast. But tangibly within our practice, what else could we be doing?
I think there's a bit of a sort of grief curve that we might need to go through. I think you're right. A lot of coaches, I count myself in this, can feel a level of fear, particularly when we see these headlines around AI, is going to come and replace everybody's jobs and this sort of thing. And we see somebody releasing a coach bot that can effectively do the same sort of stuff that I do, but does it at 1% of the cost. Well, I'm replaceable by a machine. That's a sad thing this month, actually. So it's ridiculous. The news stories that are out there this month, and there is a CEO that has been appointed, and the CEO is a machine, a humanoid robot as well, to make it even more dystopian. It's horrendous. And as coaches, we can feel a sense of fear around that. But if all that we ever do is see those headlines and feel frightened, and so bury our heads in the sand and then go away until the next scary headline comes along, we're not doing anything about it. I think we kind of need to confront it and go and explore, well, what really is out there? And then we end up coming through that and discovering, it's not that clever, actually. When you've used ChatGPT for a while, then you discover, it's just a computer. All you're doing is it appears to be quite clever, and you can interact with it in ways that you couldn't interact with MS-DOS back in the day. But so it's nice, but it's still a machine. It's not a human. It isn't, of course, it's not going to replace me. And then once you go through that, then you can go, oh, so if that's the case, then what could I use that would be really helpful? If I've got a coaching transcript that I have that I've gathered together because I need to do it for my credentialing, or that with a coachee's permission that I've got that for me to reflect on in my own right, I can actually go into ChatGPT, upload that transcript, and ask it to give me feedback based on the ICF competencies in detail, and it will do it in 10 seconds. And suddenly that gives me something really rich based on my own coaching conversations to reflect on. That feels like a really effective use of modern technology that we wouldn't have had even a year ago. So I really think that we need to sort of overcome that fear by engaging with the news around it, start to experiment ourselves. And I think, that's why I started the Coach Tech Collective. Every month I write this report, which has got as much of the news in it as I think is relevant. And then we live experiment with a tool together Last month we were experimenting with like a strobe light tool that is apparently meant to induce the same sort of hallucinations that you experience if you're on psychedelic drugs, but without any of the downsides, because you can just switch it off when you don't like it anymore. This month we're looking at one where you sort of type in my coaching issue and it will generate a collage of images based on the Smithsonian Open Access projects that then you can then use those in a reflective exercise to go, oh, what those images kind of came up based on my reflections. What meaning do those have, and what interests me the most?
Wow. And that, I mean, that's all just mind-boggling. That's amazing.
So the Coach Tech Collective, just to get involved, like how could our listeners get involved within that initiative?
Yes, you can sign up on my website, which is not very well designed, I'll be honest. So it's probably easier if you just find me on LinkedIn, and I can kind of share with you all the details on there. But yes, I think it's a really nice collection. Like I say, it's global, so we've got people from over in Asia and over the other side of the pond and across Europe as well. And so it's a really good collection of coaches. These are not all sort of tech nerdy coaches. It's a lot of people who are interested enough in the subject that they know that it's kind of going to be relevant in the future at some point and just want to prepare themselves. And a lot of our conversations are around grappling with the fear and just getting ourselves comfortable with it. So it's a good place to be. Yeah.
I'm intrigued. I'm definitely going to be checking it out. Thank you.
Very good. And I mean, we always like to, as we're sort of coming towards the end of with our time with you, Sam, is we always, as an author yourself, resources are a wonderful thing for us all to be able to tap into. And we're always like to ask our guests, what would you recommend to our listeners, in terms of support or areas that they might go and find out some more?
Well, I mean, of course, my books are excellent, and you should definitely check those out. So I'll just quickly
and they are, Sam.
Yeah, so the first one is How to Thrive as a Coach in a Digital World. And so if you are interested in the sort of concepts, principles, philosophy that guide or that should guide our approach to technology as coaches, that one is, I think that one's really interesting. That's probably my favorite of the two. The other one is called Superhuman Coaching. That one is probably more popular in that it's a lot more practical. So that's 10 sorts of technology that coaches could, hypothetically at least, take off the shelf and start using in their coaching today. And so it's meant to be a lot more sort of how to experiment. And so I think those two sort of go together quite nicely, but depending on which one you prefer, you might want to pick one of those up. And I write a newsletter on LinkedIn, which is, it's not exclusively about technology, but tends to be thinking about the future of coaching. And so that's every couple of weeks I try to get some new thoughts out there. And there are a couple as well. If you're particularly interested in AI, Rebecca Rutschman, who is a co-founder of a coaching chatbot based in Germany, she writes a LinkedIn newsletter. And then there are a couple of researchers in that space. Nikita Blanche is the leading researcher as far as coaching AI is concerned. And Jonathan Passmore has always got stuff coming out his ears around the interests of technology and coaching. So a couple of avenues to explore there.
No, that's really good. And I certainly, Sam, can endorse the LinkedIn newsletters. I do read those, and there have been some particularly, I did like the one on fear of change, and that was a particularly, I would encourage our listeners and watchers to go and check that one out. It's a very quick, lovely read, and just landed with a few points. So no, absolutely, thank you very much for that, Sam. That's excellent. It's really good.
So any other further books in the pipeline that might be coming in the next few years?
Well, I mean, there's always probably something that I did. There was one that came out this year, which is not actually to do with technology. It's to do with leadership and thinking about how the future of humanity needs a different sort of leadership. We've had the 20th century style of top-down hierarchical leadership. And then the beginning of the 21st century, there's been this sort of extreme opposite approach to leadership that says, oh, well, it should just be egalitarian and sort of self-managed organizations and this sort of thing. And what I'm trying to play for is I think we need something a bit longer term. It's a bit more nuanced. It's a bit braver, sort of encapsulates being, if I'm allowed to call 20th century style masculine and the 21st century style feminine, that sort of says, oh, well, actually, there's good sides to both of those. And can we have a more holistic look at that? So it's a bit of an experimental book, to be honest. It's a poem presented against the backdrop of AI generated artwork. So if that feels like your cup of tea, you might want to give it a go. If you think that doesn't sound much like a university textbook, it definitely isn't that. So yeah, I would avoid it if you don't think you'd like it. But yeah, I'm often, writing is one of my hobbies. And so, yeah, there'll probably be some more to come.
Yeah, interesting. No, thank you for that. And it does seem that you very much, for you, it's this enablement, whether it is through writing, whether it is through connecting, whether it is creating spaces for conversations. So interested to see where your career kind of takes you in the future. So otherwise, how can our listeners get in touch? I mean, you've mentioned a website, we've got LinkedIn, we've got a newsletter, we've got the Coach Tech Collective. Anything else to add to that? That seems pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I think that's basically me. My website is isaacson.uk, but people can't generally spell Isaacson. So if you try looking and can't find it, then look around on LinkedIn for coaching and technology, and it probably won't take long to find me. There's not many people that are talking about that niche. Yeah, so I look forward to having lots of conversations with listeners. Thank you.
And hopefully these conversations will then spark more conversations, so more people start talking about technology and coaching, and whether that is more from an outdoor coaching perspective or not, and ultimately kind of tech and outdoors and the different opportunities that it could bring.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hope more people become aware of it and more people keep on talking about it. It can only be a good thing. Thank you so much for having me today. It's been great.
No, absolute pleasure. Thank you so much.
Real pleasure. So,
yeah, the redwoods in the Japanese garden seem a far-flung exotic destination from the wilds of Wiltshire in southwest England this afternoon. But I have to say, throughout our conversation, I haven't been able to but reflect, having been in Dartmoor for the weekend and exposed to the elements in the weather, how that then comes across into the outdoor world. And I know that weather is something that, when people are stepping outdoors, is something that gets cited again and again. Well, what about the weather? How do I cope with the weather? And clearly, if you're in a virtual reality, the weather is not so much of a challenge to work around. All good. Perfect. Thank you so much. Absolutely fascinating conversation, and hopefully food for thought for everyone who is listening and watching in. And yeah, what are your thoughts? What is your relationship with tech? How open to change are you? And how can you experiment and integrate technology and the outdoors? We would love to know. Clearly, this episode is one of many. We have an entire back catalogue of other episodes. We are now firmly in series 6. So if this is the first that you have listened or watched, please do go and check out all the other episodes. There is a real treasure trove full of golden nuggets to be explored. And if you know someone who you think you would our community would benefit from listening to, please do recommend future guests. We're always looking for other people to come on and share their knowledge, their experience and their skills. But other than that, thank you so much for taking the time to listen in. Enjoy the rest of your day, whatever that may entail, and see you again soon on another episode of Coaching Outdoors.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.